All right, I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's been a long weekend, but full of great presentations, and we're thrilled to have such great participation. I'm Chris Tabry. I've been organizing the events and logistics for UANA as their first intern ever, and it's been a great experience. And if you are interested in getting involved with UANA, I highly suggest reaching out. So I will be your moderator for this presentation, and I'm happy to present Sophie and Lisa. They are amazing at their jobs, and they work in Canada's Game Plan program. I will let them explain Game Plan on their own, but let me tell you, it's a great program. It's really great for athletes, and again, it can't be said enough how great they are at their jobs. So thanks again for being here, and with that, I leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have the opportunity to discuss a topic dear to our heart with you today, athlete transitions and well-being. This presentation was developed by Game Plan team, as Chris said. So Game Plan is Canada's athlete wellness program, assisting Canadian national team athletes during and for 2 years post-retirement. About 10 years ago, leaders in Canadian sport have come together to support athlete wellness and transitions. Partner with the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canadian Paralympic Committee, federal government through Sport Canada, COPSIN, and private partners like Deloitte, we're all engaged because we see value in supporting athletes. So, a lot of attention has been given to athletes transitioning out of sport. That was one of Game Plan's initial focus. Since then, we have expanded our support and programming to assist athletes in life on and off the field of play. Recently, attention has also been given to athlete transition within the sports. In our presentation today, we will talk about the various transitions both in and out of sport that can affect the athlete.
So as Sophie said, we want to be looking at athletes as people, as the whole person. And so when we introduce ourselves, we thought we'd talk a little bit about who we are in our work settings, but also who we are as people, just to start building into that holistic perspective. So as Chris said, my name is Lisa Hoffart. I'm the Game Plan Advisor in Regina, Saskatchewan. I've been in this role for about 7 years. I'm also a registered psychologist and a mental performance consultant. And a lot of what I like to do is create a big picture of athlete and performance and well-being. Outside of work, I'm a mom of 2 kids. They're 5 and 3. I'm also a distance runner. I competed varsity cross country, track and field, and continue to run a number of different distances between 5K and a half marathon. I love spending time outside in the prairies and getting back to the mountains, which is where I grew up.
I'm Sophie. I'm from Quebec, so this is where my nice accent is from. I'm the Game Plan Advisor there. I'm also a career guidance counselor. I'm also a PhD student on the year 6 out of 6. I'm a mom of 3 kids, 3 small kids of 4, 6, and 8. I'm also a mountain biker. I've been part of a mountain bike club for more than a year now. And I love also the mountains and being outside and spending time with my family. So today, what we will go over. So why is this topic important? Why you should pay attention to it? What are transitions and what sphere do they impact? What are the difficulties they bring? How can you be better equipped to face them? How can you achieve that and who can help you? So right now, if you're a coach, think on how you can support your athletes and help them prepare throughout these transitions. If you're an athlete listening, think of how you could be better prepared and better equipped to face all that. So throughout the presentation, we will speak generally about the material, but please bring your own lens to the content.
So when we talk about why is this important, why is it important to look at athletes as whole people? Why is it important to take a holistic perspective? Why is it important to support athletes through their transitions in sport and out of sport? So really, these are facts that we've pulled from a number of different research studies that highlight the importance of holistic approach athlete transitions and dual careers, which is essentially where athletes have other components in their life, whether it's work, being a student, pursuing things outside of sport. And so as we talk about transitions today, we really want to emphasize a holistic approach to thinking about athletes. So instead of just considering their athletic context themselves, we want to acknowledge that these individuals have several aspects that make up their lives. So a change or transition in one area of their life can affect all other areas of their life. These effects in other areas might be small, like a ripple effect, or it might be large, as if you did a cannonball into the pool. Changes and transitions affect our emotions, cognitions, behaviors, and relationships. And as a result, changes in a sport environment can emotionally impact the athlete, which can then carry over into all other areas of their life. Similarly, changes in the athlete's personal realm can bring impact into how they show up in their sport realm. And so by treating the athlete as a person, we can create better space for them to work through these transitions in a way that emphasizes wellness and coping, which will have a positive impact on the individual as a whole, as well as on their athletic performance. Being versatile and well-rounded has an impact on you as a person, which then impacts performance. And one of the key things that we say within Game Plan is that well-rounded individuals perform better, stay in sport longer, and transition out of sport healthier, which is ultimately what we want for these individuals. So when we look at transitions, essentially these can be described as a change process between events, situations, or contexts. So transitions can have both positive and negative outcomes. So for example, one transition could be moving from a junior level to a senior level as an athlete, which could be a very positive thing that they've worked towards for a long time. Another transition could be expecting to make a team and getting cut, and that could be a very negative situation for that person. Career transitions are currently classified based on two criteria. So a life domain, where that transition is actually initiated, and Sophie's going to talk about that in a little bit, as well as the transition predictability. And so when we look at some of these different transitions, we really want to be able to start understanding them. In terms of the predictability, for a long time that was divided into two different categories, which were normative and non-normative. And they've recently added a quasi-normative category. And so when we look at normative transitions, these are relatively predictable and they're derived from a typical athlete development pathway. So for example, moving from a junior level to a senior level, training to compete at a Olympics or Paralympics, and then an athletic retirement. Those would all be examples of maybe some normative transitions. Non-normative are those things that are less predictable. So an injury, or in our case, a global pandemic. And so with this addition of the quasi-normative category, it started to look at just another aspect to be able to identify those categories or those transitions that are predictable for a particular category of athlete. So the transition into, once they've made that senior team, then actually being able to train for and make and compete at an Olympics or a Paralympics, or an elite athlete who transitions and actually centralizes at a training location. So those are going to be some of those quasi-normative transitions for elite athletes. So similar to those normative transitions, these quasi-normative transitions have the possibility to prepare for those in advance. And just as an athlete trains for various demands of competition, so physical, mental, the social, all the logistical travel aspects, in order to be able to be better prepared and increase the likelihood of success, an individual can also prepare for these transitions that they're going to face, which will then help them to navigate these transitions more effectively. And the more effectively they can navigate these transitions, the more successfully they can then move into their next stage of their life and their sport.
So a good way to assess what sphere the transition's impact is to look at the holistic model of Wildman. So a transition has an impact on multiple levels of the athlete's life. When you go through one, it's important to assess what are the ripple effects on the other levels, because they are all interlinked. So whether it is a transition on the sport level or even the academic level, it will have a repercussion on all the other levels. So to be a little bit more concrete, let's say we have Luke. Luke is transitioning from junior to senior, the red zone here. So at the athletic level, it means he's going from being a development athlete to a national team athlete. But at the same time, Luke is probably also going from teenagehood to adulthood. And probably at the same time, when you're a teenager, where all your friends and your peer and your coach is and your parents are very important to you, maybe Luke has to centralize or move for sport. And now his teammate and his coach will be way more important in his life. On the academic level, maybe he has to transition from high school to higher education at the same time. And on the financial level, Luke was probably getting a lot of help by his parents, but now the national team is more expensive. Maybe he moved out of his parents' house and will need to be more independent financially. It's the same thing if you think of another athlete transitioning out of sport. So we need to ask ourselves, does this athlete have a friend outside of his teammate? Is he okay financially? Has he pursued education? So it's really important to assess what are the ripple effects, as I said, on all the levels, and how you can be ready to face a transition on all those metabolic levels.
So when we look at these different levels, as Sophie was talking about, athletes and individuals can experience difficulties at each of these, and they can be aligned within that level, and they can also have a lot of influence on each other. And so when we look at this first one, when we look at the athlete level, Sophie gave some of these examples, but for example, an athlete that's going from a junior level, a junior team to a senior team might all of a sudden have to deal with higher training levels, higher competition standards that can then have just impacts on themselves and athletes, the training demand that they're putting on themselves, that can impact so many different pieces of their life. The athletes that come in from a junior team onto a senior team, for example, might be used to being the top athlete in their sport or on their team. And then all of a sudden they might be one of the kind of lower people on that team and needing to start working their way up from a performance perspective. And so that can impact how they're thinking about themselves. That can result in changes to their self-image. And that can be a big perspective or a big thing from the athletic perspective, the athletic level. There can also be increased athletic involvement. So again, typically as athletes are moving through these phases, we tend to have higher time requirements, higher energy requirements that are involved. Obviously that can then change to decreased once they're actually transitioning out of sport. So lots of difficulties that can come in from that athletic level. When we look at the psychological level, again, lots of different factors that can come in and cognitively and emotionally, psychologically affect that person. So they might all of a sudden have greater responsibilities for being within that team, being on a senior team all of a sudden, needing to maybe take care of themselves, not maybe having parents or coaches taking as big a role on that. There can then be dealing with unexpected situations. So going into a team, maybe centralizing, not being sure what's expected of them, not being sure typical formatting. So needing to deal with and manage all those unexpected situations in a healthy and positive way. And again, just that higher pressure, higher expectations that can come with competing at higher levels can then create extra stress. And if the individual isn't managing that well, that can sometimes come in and cause obviously just increased stress, but that can impact mental health and mental wellness as well. When we're looking at the psychosocial level, coaches and teammates have such a big impact on athletes. And especially when athletes are moving up, they start to develop new relationships. That can be challenging if you're moving to a place where maybe you don't know a ton of people, you're trying to navigate all these new situations and throwing new people into the mix, taking maybe away or physically removing some of those previous relationships, that can be very stressful. Tend to spend more time with your sport teammates, which I think can be great. A lot of athletes really become such good friends with the people that they compete with and that they're on teams with. But one of the aspects is that sometimes there's conflict. Sometimes people don't always get together, and that can be quite challenging. And then again, for those athletes that do have to move, sometimes that can cause an increase in isolation if they're maybe living by themselves for the first time or living with people that they don't know and maybe don't get along with. Having to centralize that can have a big aspect on their psychosocial level. Sophie talked about some of the academic and vocational transitions that athletes can go through. Especially from that high school to post-high school transition, there can sometimes be a lot of emphasis that's put on that individual in terms of making some of those post-secondary decisions. So are you going to university? Are you going to college? Are you going to trades? Are you taking a year off? So all those questions start coming into play. How many classes are you taking? What are you going to take? So lots of different things that can create challenges. And then also if they are taking on courses or taking on maybe different work outside of sport, sometimes that can result in less structured environments than they're used to. So really needing to have that time management come in. Then also looking at longer term, what is it that they want to do? So maybe really emphasizing their sport career, their athletic career right now, but looking at maybe what do you want to do after? And so trying to create a plan for that career can sometimes feel intimidating or daunting if they don't have the right resources in place. And then finally, when we look at the financial level, again, a number of different difficulties or barriers that can come in. So sometimes in Canada, we have carding where they get different funding from the government and various sources, but just being able to navigate that structure can be quite challenging to be able to figure out if they're eligible and if they're getting it again and how they actually go about all those different pieces. Things like if they are living on their own for the first time, how do they create a budget and how do they actually stick to that budget, and maybe emphasizing some self-control. So as we can see, if we can start to understand what difficulties an athlete might face, that can then help us to help better prepare that athlete for those difficulties, which can then result in better management of the typical challenges of athlete transitions.
So you might now realize transitions are way more complicated than you might have thought. Their impact on your life might be bigger than you thought. Let me walk you through this analogy to help you understand how you can better prepare for it. So look at this sailor. In order to be a good sailor, you need to be able to pilot, to understand the wind, to change your sails, etc. A good sailor is versatile. He didn't learn to be expert at one thing, but he is very good at many things to be confident he can face whatever weather he will encounter. So you need to think like a sailor. You need to be strategic on where you spend your energy. I'm asking you right now, do you want to be a high-performance crawl swimmer or a high-performance diver? Or do you want to be an overall high-performance individual? Work smarter, don't work harder. We were trained to work harder, but now with all the science and the data, we can learn to work smarter. And sometimes we feel guilty to work smarter. Let me show you this picture I found. So how often were you this guy in the front, right? When someone told you, hey, maybe you should talk with someone about this, or maybe you should take up a class in university or in high school. How often did you say, oh no, I'm way too busy to do that? But what if those wheels were in mental health, right? So what if this university class or just taking up these resources would make you way more efficient in time in the long term? So that's what we mean by working smarter, not harder. How can you adapt and use your resources and be more strategic? Now you can probably ask us, how can I achieve all that, right? So throughout the rest of our presentation, we'll give you a couple tips. They're not the only tips, but you can surely start with them. I don't know if any of you saw the movie Inside Out, which is a movie about emotion and the head of a little girl who plays hockey. What I like about this movie is it shows us that in order to feel fulfilled and in a complete life, you have multiple islands in your personality. You have the islands where of your family, the islands of schools, the islands of finance, the islands of sport, right? So in order to be versatile, you need to understand what gives you energy, what drives you, and start to map that out. And once you've mapped that out, you also need to list what is your non-negotiable. What is non-negotiable for you in time of crisis, in time of challenge, or in time of transitions? Is it exercising 20 minutes a day? Is it eating healthy, or is it talking to my family? Is it your 10 minutes of meditation every day? And in time of these crises, you need to stick to your non-negotiable list, telling yourself that this is working smarter. But remember that this map is always moving. And in order to get better at knowing what it looks like in the present, you will need to pay attention to it. You'll need to be more mindful so that you don't let an island crumble. Be purposeful where you put your energy. Again, it's okay if an island or an area of your map is getting less attention for a while. Let's say a year of prep for the Olympic or throughout an exam crush at the university. but know why you're paying less attention to your island and when exactly to return to it.
So again, Sophie talked about those non-negotiables, and one of the things we really want to spend a little bit of time on is helping to give you some ideas about how you can start to figure out your non-negotiables. We spend so much time looking at how athletes develop themselves, how they emphasize their performance, but we also talk about being well-rounded and versatile, having an identity outside of sport. And so the 4 different activities or the 4 different ideas here, again, aren't the only answers, and not to say that they're all going to be the right answers for you, but it just gives you some examples about what you can do for yourself or what you can help your athletes to be doing in order to help them really start to take that holistic perspective for themselves. So initially, we want to help them to do self-awareness and reflection. And we know that athletes are good at this. This is one of the skills that help them to get better on their field of play, that help them to actually make those improvements in training and in their competition by looking at what went well, what do I need to improve, how do I fix those gaps, all those different questions that they can ask themselves in their performance domain. We want to start asking those kinds of questions in our day-to-day life, in other areas of our life that aren't sport related. And so a lot of that is engaging in discovery, engaging in reflective activities. And so you can see there's a few different pieces here that we could reflect on. The first one is values. And this is an activity that we do a lot with game plan with our athletes, just getting these people to reflect on what are their personal values. And again, these aren't sport specific values. These are values in terms of how they live their day-to-day life. And so typically what we do is we give these athletes, these people, a list of values. It can be anywhere from 15 to 30. There can be more on there, but just giving them these examples of what these values might be. So it could be family or time outside or humor or creativity. There's so many different values. There's no right or wrong, but getting them to then look at this list and figure out what's important to me. And so they can start by circling it, go through the list, kind of identify the ones that they think are really important. And then you can prompt them to take it a step further and say, okay, what are your maybe top 3 or your top 5? What's your number 1? And again, once they have that narrowed down, you can start thinking about how do you live by these values in a day-to-day basis? How do you live through these when you're with your family, with your friends? How do you live through these in school? How do you live through these in sport? And again, applying those values can really help them to feel grounded and true to who they are. In terms of emotions, again, such a big component in terms of sport, having emotional IQ and emotional awareness, we want to start applying this in our day-to-day lives. And so being able to think about what emotions you're experiencing moment to moment, how those are affecting you. So the emotions, how they're affecting your thoughts, what that feels like in your body, just being able to pause and notice that can be a really good starting point. You can do a lot more work with your emotions after that, working on accepting why it's there, accepting that you're experiencing it, being able to feel uncomfortable with some of those emotions that we maybe don't like as much, but also to embrace those emotions that maybe feel more fulfilling. We can also look at motivation. And again, we know athletes are so motivated in terms of really pushing themselves physically and mentally, but looking at what that motivation is for you in your day-to-day life. So why are you taking some of these steps? For example, why do you want to go to school? Why is it that you're doing some of these different things? If you can start to find that meaning for yourself, again, it starts to really enhance and kind of create a fuller life for yourself outside of sport. So those activities, that self-awareness and reflection on as starting points, values, emotions, motivation, can all really help to enhance meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in all areas of life. So we talk about that enhancing the kind of personal life, but that's going to transfer back into sport as well. The second one, transferable skills. Basically, these are skills that are gained in one life domain that can be applied to another life domain. And so sport applies so many characteristics that individuals can use in all areas of your life. So if we think about athletes, we know that they're often adaptable, they exemplify leadership, they have good communication, they've got good teamwork, they maybe have integrity and resilience. And those are things that we really value in athletes. But again, we can look at how do the athletes transfer those skills into other areas of their lives. And so these individuals can assess what transferable skills they've gained. So again, just thinking about the skills that they have, those non-tangibles that they've developed through sport, and then also look at how maybe they have applied those in other areas of their life already, but also how they can continue to use those in their life to increase performance in other areas. So being able to apply those transferable skills in all areas of life really helps to that individual to live more authentically, because they're using skills that they have and they're really in tune with what they're doing. Mindfulness, this is such a big topic and we're not going to talk about it for too long, but really, again, we know that athletes have such a great ability to focus on the task at hand and be in the present moment. And so mindfulness is really just a similar way to apply that attention and appreciation to daily life. It's about being able to pause and help us to feel more present, more connected, and more engaged. Obviously, lots of different ways that you can practice mindfulness, lots of different tools that you can practice mindfulness. One of the easiest ones is just to put your feet on the floor and kind of start grounding yourself through your feet. So to wiggle your toes, rock feet back and forward, pay attention to the sensations that you're noticing, pay attention to the weight that you feel through your legs, being able to just notice your feet. And it can be a really good way to ground yourself to where you're at physically, but also to have that kind of psychological presence brought back to the physical, to the present moment as well. In terms of life planning, again, this can be so many different things, such as being able to look at the career planning, looking at exploring interests, looking at who you are outside of sport. One of the activities that we've been doing with Game Plan athletes recently are vision boards. And really what this does is it helps these people to think about what it is that they want to accomplish in life as a whole. So sport can definitely be part of this vision board, but also looking at other areas of their life. So basically with completing a vision board, you start to include different things that you want to accomplish. So different things in all those different areas of your life. And by actually going through this, you start to engage in creativity. You start to increase your clarity about what it is that you want to do. A lot of people often find that they have enhanced energy and then also enhanced motivation. And so this can then help them to feel a greater sense of purpose and a greater sense of clarity. And so again, as Sophie was saying earlier, it's about working smarter, not harder. So athletes, I think, tend to be extremely motivated, wanting to do everything at once. With this, we want to make sure we're starting small. So start with one of these, start with one activity, take it step by step, take it little by little. So gradually start to develop yourself. It's not something you have to do overnight, just as you didn't start at the top of your sport as an athlete. You don't have to have your whole life outside of sport figured out all at once. It's just being able to take those steps to do it gradually.
Sorry, so now that we have gone through how you can achieve that, sometimes it can feel overwhelming, as Lisa was telling you. So you can also ask yourself, who can help you with all that? You're not alone. And like in sport, you have an entire team behind you to help you with that. And from times to times, it's important to assess that team too, right? So a good way to assess if you have a good team to support you throughout transition is to think about 4 person. So you need to have your builder. So the builder is the person who's going to challenge you, who pushed you to be at your best, right? You also need to have your champion. That's your number 1 fan. That's like your mom, your grandmom, your grandpa. So that's the person always cheering for you, whatever happens. You also need your collaborator. So the person you call for good teamwork, right? An activity, someone who works really good with you. And you need your companion. So this is the person you can call regardless the hour of the day. And the tricky part is that this cannot be all one person. You need at least 4 different persons to fit all these spots. So I'm asking you again, who is there to challenge you? Who can you lean on? Who is your number 1 fan? What resources do you have access to help you with the different challenges? Are there gaps in your teams? Do you need to seek out new people to add to your support network? So from times to times, as I said, it's important as our environment is evolving around us to ground yourself into your support system and ask yourself, who can I lean on? If this happened, who am I going to call? If this happened, what resources do I have access to? So Lisa, to sum it up.
Perfect. So what we want to do is we want to put some of these pieces together and this is just a nice visual to really look at some of the different pieces that we've talked about. So that self at the middle. So who you are, what are the various aspects that make up your life and that are important to you? Looking at that situation. So being able to figure out what the transition is, what's going on, what stage you're at. Is it expected or unexpected? Is it positive or negative? Is it one transition or maybe several transitions? So lots to be able to figure out in terms of what's going on for you. As Sophie just talked about, support is so critical, so crucial through this, being able to look at who are the key people involved in the situation, what impact do they have on you? So again, there might be key people involved from a sport perspective, teammates, coaches, but also looking at who are the people in other areas of your life that you can rely on to be able to support and assist you. And with some of those strategies, again, I talked about those a couple slides ago, but what are those strategies that you can use to work through that situation? So looking at what's helped you in the past, what didn't help, what strengths and resources can you use? So again, going back to those ideas of really having that self-assessment, the reflection, using your transferable skills, being able to use career planning, being able to use mindfulness. And so these all contribute to a holistic perspective of who you are and what you're dealing with. By emphasizing all these aspects, you're able to emphasize your own personal wellness, which will have a positive impact on how you function and perform in all areas of your life.
So last questions. What defines you? Are you able to answer any of these questions? So who are you outside of sport? Who can help you better define that? What skills do you have already that can be transferred in others' area? What does your map look like? So like the sailor, you can learn to take advantage of all opportunities the seas offer you to perform instead of waiting for the right wind to shift so that you can use the only sail you've decided to take with you. Again, take it one question at a time. And if you find it difficult to answer any of these, maybe it's start to working on yourself as an individual, not just as an athlete. And remember, you didn't become an expert in your sport in one day. You don't have to have this all figured out at once. We will repeat that. The important thing is that you start working on yourself outside of sport to better be equipped to face whatever transitions comes at you. So, if there's any questions regarding this topic, feel free to, throughout the chat, I'm guessing, or with Chris, we're there for you. And we hope all these little tips were helpful, whether you were a coach or an athlete.
Yes, thank you, Sophie and Lisa. That was really interesting, and it's really good to see all the different struggles and that athletes go through, and just putting all that information out there and normalizing all of those experiences and all the mental health and wellness aspects that go into making the person a whole, because an athlete is more than just an athlete. So we got a few questions. I'm just reading the translations on my phone. So there's a coach who he coaches athletes in the 12 to 15 age range normally, and these athletes he's feeling are scared about moving up in age groups and having their technical difficulty levels and expectations increase. What can he do to support them both emotionally and mentally?
I'm going to let my mental prep here answer that.
Sounds good. So when we look at ages 12 to 15, there's so much growth, obviously physically happening there, but so much psychological development that's happening there. And one of the key things is that these athletes are obviously starting to mature as athletes, but as people too. And when we look at just even a cognitive development and a psychological development, they find so much emphasis is placed on peers and having acceptance and belonging there. And so part of the fear, I think, is when they start to move up is navigating the social relationships of that higher age group, but also because, especially when you're a performance setting, having so much emphasis on whether or not you're good enough, that can be a bit of a struggle. So those are obviously only a couple of the difficulties that they might be worried about, but understanding what those difficulties are for them, but then being able to bring it back to the current performance. So I think anytime a coach can work with athletes to enhance confidence in terms of what they're doing well in terms of how that will then translate into the next level. I think that's really critical. I think anytime a coach can help the athlete to start developing problem solving skills, so working through a problem and starting to think about what they might do, again, it just helps them to be able to transition to that next level where they might not have as much focus and they need to be, or as much focus or attention from a coach, and they need to be navigating some of those things on their own. So those would be a couple examples. Again, not necessarily all of the right answers or all of the options, but just some initial ideas that kind of look at that age level.
It's a very tough question. It's a very tough age, but I think those are some really good insights into some of the difficulties that those athletes might be facing. So, oh, I just lost the question. What would you recommend for people who are struggling to find something new to put their energy into after retirement from sport?
Yeah, I would recommend to start trying stuff, right? There's no one right answer. When you were in sport, all your eggs were in the same basket, right? So outside of sport, you can diversify your life too, right? You can get your adrenaline from mountain biking, and you can get your intellectual from reading a book, and you can get your social by joining club, right? And you'll discover that by trying all these stuffs. And don't be scared of trying something you won't like, because that's also going to teach you something about yourself. So first, map out your areas. So what do you need in life to feel fulfilled, and where are those gaps? And one by one, try new things to fill up those gaps. And it takes time to discover what you like, right? Don't be in search of one passion. Just be in search of what you like as an individual, what makes you fulfilled. And then in the long run, you'll probably discover something that grounds you, or multiple things that all together will make your day like passion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess like it's important to emphasize that it's not easy.
No.
Transitioning is not easy, and it takes time to adapt. And as you said, just trying all those new things.
And I'll just add one thing into, we don't always have time, or athletes don't always have time to be doing that with a ton of energy or with a lot of attention while they're in their athletic realm. But even if they can be trying that, but little by little as they're going through their athletic career, it makes it easier for when they do retire. They've got these things that they've already kind of tested out. So again, they might not have all the answers for what they want to do or those exact next steps, but they maybe have a better idea of that because they've been working on it along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point. It actually ties in I think it ties in pretty well with this next question. After what age do you suggest after what age do you suggest bringing this topic up with athletes and talking about retirement and stuff? What age would you say it's important to start bringing into discussion with athletes?
We might have I'm guessing we don't have a different point of view here, but I would say it's never too early, because we don't talk of retirement with young athletes. We don't talk about a plan B, because life is not a plan B. You have to plan A, and you have to work on both of them at the same time. So it depends on how you bring it, right? So we're not telling them to prep for retirement. We're telling them to prep for life and to become a more rounded individual at the same time. So when they bring up retirement to you, they feel ready for it, and that you only have to say, okay, so now these are your area of life that you like, these are your possibilities, these are your resources, but you're already working with a well-rounded individual. So the ideal is that you start your sport with that mentality, so that whenever you retire, so is it from when you're a development athlete or after for Olympic, that you since you add this mentality, retirement just become the next chapter, right? Am I making sense, Lisa? Is it?
Yeah, I like that.
Absolutely.
Answer.
And the thing is, in terms of our presentation today, we talked a lot about the athlete that maybe goes from junior to senior to Olympics or Paralympics and then transitions out afterwards. But we know that most athletes don't do that. And like I said, I'm in Saskatchewan. It's one of the smaller provinces in Canada. A lot of the athletes that I work with, maybe they're done after high school, maybe they're done after kind of university, so 22. And so that's obviously a lot different timeline than if they're competing maybe till late 20s. And so if we can start looking at this kind of around that 15, 16, it's just that's when they're in that stage to be able to look at so many different options and not only have that athlete perspective, but that bigger picture perspective too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and just the overall big picture throughout from the very beginning and understanding the different circumstances that athletes might face. Next question is, what role can parents play in these transitions?
Just sometimes is just asking questions outside of sport, right? How was your day at school? So when's the last time you talked with your best friend, right? So just, I've known a couple athletes who told me what grounded me is when I was back at home, it didn't matter how many medals I just won at the Olympic. I had to help my mom clean the dishes. And then she told me about what my dad did. And then my brother too wanted to speak about his new invention when he was an engineer and stuff like that. So just sometimes asking those, being interested, and that applies to coach too. So many athletes have told me, but my coach never asked me actually how I was doing outside of sport, or if I had a girlfriend or a boyfriend and how it was going through this move, or while I was on camp for 5 weeks. Or so just being interested in the athlete outside of sport will help this athlete ask himself or herself questions and work on these areas too.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Lisa, you worked a lot with young kids and maybe parents too. So
yeah, and even Sophie talked about kind of that individual board of directors and having those different people. And as a parent, it's thinking about what's the most appropriate role and maybe what's the best role for you. And I think a lot of time it's that person that the athlete or the individual can go to through anything. So that person they can call at any point. And I know obviously there's a lot of different parent-child relationships, but just trying to obviously be there for them and support them through all these things, and knowing that they are more than an athlete, that just gives them the support and the confidence to be able to go through their sport, but also testing those other things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely starts at home, keeping those conversations and grounding you, as Sophie was saying, and what life outside of sport can look and feel like. So the next question will kind of shift gears a little bit. Are there any programs that you know of with FINA or the Olympic Committee that kind of deal with this that athletes or coaches can access?
So the big one that I would say is Athlete 365, which is through the IOC, and they do a lot of work with athlete wellness. It's maybe not as specifically tied to transitions, but it's about emphasizing individual wellness, individual health, gaining skills and expertise in other areas. So that would be the initial one that comes to mind. Sophie, I'm not sure if you have any other ones that you can think of.
No, but I know there's more than 60 wellness programs for athletes around the world. So sometimes it's just reaching out to one of these programs near you and ask for if there's any, like for game plan. I know a lot of our resources also apply to coaches, even if it's not all branded on the website, because it's a program to support athletes. But if a coach is asking about one of our webinars or mental health support or anything like that, we cover also coaches. So maybe it's just to dig in a program near you, or call the as Lisa said, the IOC or the Canadian Olympic Committee maybe knows also where to refer, depending where you're from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that in a similar area to that last question, it might be a tough one, but A lot of the countries in the Americas are smaller and they work with smaller federations. What would be some, in your opinion, some basic first steps that these federations or countries could take in implementing their own programs or creating their own programs similar to game plan or wellness programs? It's a tough one.
It's a tough one, yeah. I would say in Canada, what we did is we first went and did the research to assess the needs of our athlete, right? So maybe you could gather a group of researchers and assess where are the gaps, what are the needs of your federations, of your athlete, what kind of resource should you put on first, and then you don't need to wait and go big at first, right? We didn't start with a launch of this entire wide program. We started small with, like, let's say a bit of career planning and a bit of webinars, and then maybe you can go from there and ask a conference or ask a presenter and see how this takes up. But it does takes a lot of time and a lot of networking. So I would, on my part, recommend reaching out to those people who have built programs, because I know for sure they're eager to help and to explain how they did that. We have a lot of communication with the US Olympic Committee. We had a lot of communication with Australia too on how they built their program and what did work and what didn't work. And so just there's so many people who've tried so many things that it's good if we can connect to each other and start with that. It doesn't matter if you're big or small, like we all have the athletes at heart. So we're all going to be willing to help for sure.
Yeah, I think that was a really good answer. And I think the first part of your answer, talking about starting with the research, it's really important to recognize what's different in your individual situation. The needs in your country and for your federation and your sport are probably very different than everywhere else. So recognizing the need for that research and that individualization is very important. What would be some suggestions you have for athletes that are transitioning in levels in sports and moving from maybe a club to a provincial or a national team level? Because that probably means moving locations and stuff. You mentioned this in your presentation, but do you have any specific recommendations for athletes going through that kind of experience?
So this is a lot of what we deal with in Saskatchewan, just because, like, again, we're a smaller province and we don't tend to have the really elite athletes training here. They tend to go off to the bigger centers. And so a lot of what we're doing is looking at basically the experiences that have prepared them for this. So obviously the in-sport experiences and that they're physically ready for it, but also just looking again at some of those characteristics, the transferable skills that we've talked about. And then just looking at kind of what they're moving into. And it's nice because in Canada, we can obviously reach out to our colleagues and help to make connections and set them up that way. But looking at things like what kind of housing are they considering? Are they going to be living with someone else or on their own? Have they lived by themselves before? Are they going to be taking school? Do they need to be near transit? So just trying to look at those big picture life pieces and trying to get them thinking about it beforehand. And also, I think a big piece here is recognizing that there will be difficulties. And so if they can kind of acknowledge those difficulties and start to prepare for them, then it helps them to be able to navigate that a lot easier.
And if you're a big center, you can help too with that, because I work I'm based in Montreal, so we have 11 centralized team working with us. So we do have a lot of athletes coming in from everywhere into our center. So every year what we do is sport by sport, we do this kind of presentation where we welcome all the new athletes, but all the senior athletes are there too. And we explain a little bit of that. So take care of your mental health, take care of your wellness. If you need, this is who you can reach out. These are the resources available to you. And sometimes what we do is we make the senior team athlete talk about how they used these resources and how they coped with the move when they came in and stuff like that. So every year we do that to kind of let the athlete know that he's welcome here, that he can reach out to his past center, but he has also help here if he has trouble integrating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, creating that network is really
Yeah.
good for sure. And as Lisa said, thinking of those big picture changes ahead of time, like figuring out transit and just those things that someone might forget or get overwhelmed with on the spot ahead of time are really important in a situation like that. Another kind of specific question that you kind of touched on as a non-normative transition is that some athletic careers come to an abrupt end because of injury. How can these athletes cope with the loss of their sport?
So I think here there's a lot of grief, a lot of loss, in some cases trauma, because depending on how they actually injured it, it could have been quite a traumatic experience. And so I think a lot of it's being able to start processing that. And in some cases, I think referring to a mental health support can be really a good step to just be able to go through some of those coping resources and give them that avenue to be able to navigate that. So I think that's going to be part of it, just addressing the grief and loss and potential for trauma, but then also looking at just supporting them through kind of this unexpected and abrupt change. So again, it's looking at what kind of preparation have they done before, how set up are they for an eventual transition out of sport, and maybe it's seeing if some of those plans can be put in place. So maybe they were, for example, waiting to start a certain program at university until after they're done. It's maybe looking at, okay, can we get you started as soon as possible or as soon as you're ready? And so looking at, are there plans in place that we can maybe start applying? But also if there aren't, what is it? And you can start to do some of that exploratory processes. Sophie, you might have some other ideas too.
No, as an administrator or a coach dealing with this athlete, it's really important to help them assess their support network. As Lisa said, also referring them to a mental health specialist, but asking them, so are you close with your parents? Do you have friends? Acknowledging that it's very difficult. It's a grief process, right? So it's really helping the person go through that grief and then helping them transition into this other plan that hopefully he has started working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great answers there. It's a tough situation. You know, injury is always tough, but
Yeah.
working on planning and trying to stick to those plans as much as possible is a really good way to try and go about it. So here's a question that I know we've discussed quite a bit, even with my time at Game Plan. How can athletes transfer the skills acquired through their sport into their professional lives?
Sometimes it's just knowing what the skills are that the athlete struggles with. At Game Plan, we have a list of high performance characteristics. And then we tell the athlete, can you put a mark on which one you have? And usually they put an X on every single characteristic, and there was like 20, right? Mm-hmm. And when we tell them that in the general population, people marks about like 5 to 6 of those characteristics, they go, whoa, really? And it's like, yes, so just be mindful of what you got and how you can transfer it. Once you know that you have that, it's fairly simple to understand how to transfer it. So usually the blockage is not how to transfer it, is what do I have that I can transfer?
Yeah. Could you give a few examples of what some of those transferable skills are that athletes might be missing or not realizing that they have in such huge capacity?
Yeah. Do you have the list, huh, Lisa? I think.
Yeah. So I think I gave some of these examples earlier, things like teamwork, leadership, communication, adaptability, resilience. And so a person might think, an athlete might think, okay, well, yeah, I've been resilient in my sport, or I was adaptable. But then starting to think about what that means for them. And so even just time management, okay, they've had to manage their sport and their school, and they have to manage friendships and all these other pieces, whether it's maybe physical and massage and chiro and physio. And so that all fits into their schedule, and they're so used to doing it that they can then just transfer those skills into what they're doing. And another way to kind of think that through is that they probably are already unconsciously doing that. So thinking back to maybe school and think, okay, well, how have you been really adaptable in school? How have you helped to manage your time in school? And so giving them those kinds of questions that then get them thinking through these different domains, they're going to come up with examples and not even probably realize that they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what we do a lot too on the interview prep. That's helping them a lot, because we're asking them a question and then asking them to come up with an example of how they did that. So how did you overcome an obstacle? How did you manage stress with something that was not on your list? Or how did you manage to go to school with this? And then they come up with all these examples so they can like see a concrete way that how it will transfer into work. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think once you get those discussions going, athletes really start realizing how many skills they have and how those skills can be applied in other settings like professional workplaces. So it's getting close to the end. So we'll wrap up with one final question that's pretty related to what Lisa was talking about with the time management. So a lot of aquatic sports are very demanding schedule-wise, and there's long hours with morning and afternoon practices. And then when athletes retire, they end up having huge gaps in their day that they're not used to that can just lead to anxiety. Do you have any kind of tips or recommendations for situations like this?
Yeah, we do teach them a little bit how to detrain, as we said. So just educating them a little bit of how many hours do a normal person train, right? How many, like food wise too, what can I eat, what can I eat? So just basic education will help, but also, and then I know I've been repeating myself a lot with that, and Lisa, you see me coming, but map it out. Just map out what areas of your life can go up now that you have more energy to spread out. So just spread out your energy in those areas with a purpose, and then try new stuff, right? But there's a way to do it, and then you can talk about it with someone to just gain a little bit of perspective on what it looks like. Because a normal person don't train 37 hours a day and work full time. So it's gonna take time to rebalance your life, and it's gonna go with multiple tries, right?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great point to leave it on. It takes time.
Yeah.
You know, all of this takes time, and it's never going to be easy. So with that, we are out of time. Thank you, Sophie and Lisa, so much for being here. It was a really great presentation. I think it was really important to share. Before we go, Lisa, could you stop sharing your screen, please? Because the UANA President Maureen would like to give just a very brief thank you to wrap up the convention.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so good to see so many of you still here after a long weekend. Thank you, Sophie and Lisa, for this great presentation. And I am so happy to see still so many participants eager to be here, which says a lot about the importance of your topic. This convention, Stronger Together, a unified effort from the Americas, has been outstanding and surpassed all our expectations. To the UANA team that put this together, Yvonne Choquer, Chris Tabry, Valerie Guest, David Caranco, and Patrick Groters, thank you. You can now all go, take a break, and catch up on your sleep. This is your success. To all of the presenters, you wowed us. As I said on Friday, I know you will leave people wanting more. and one thing is very clear. There is a need for follow-up and continuing opportunities. To all of the moderators that helped out, thank you for being excited and being a great addition to the presentations. To our sponsors, Fluidra, Duraflex, SwimOutlet.com, thank you for believing in UANA. We hope you will continue with us on this journey to aquatic excellence in the Americas. Last but certainly not least, to all of you, the aquatic family of the Americas, thank you. Stay involved with the sport and engage with UANA through our social media to stay informed. There are exciting things ahead in 2021 and beyond. Remember, we are one team. Somos un equipo. Thank you and see you soon.
That was a great message, Maureen. Thank you. And I guess one thank you and then one closing note. A big thank you to our translators who worked tirelessly throughout this whole weekend to translate 16 different presentations. I know it was very tough on them and they did an amazing job. So thank you again for that. We can't thank you again enough. And lastly, please do fill out the feedback survey form that we will send you later this week. We'd love to hear some feedback so that we can do this again and be even better. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your night.